the Piers Morgan interview of Kyle Rittenhouse. And I said some colorful words about how I thought Piers Morgan was treating him in the questioning. And to my surprise, Andrew was saying, well, I kind of agree with him. We are back with the illustrious Andrew Gold. How are you doing today?
All the better for seeing you, good buddy.
Great to see you, you handsome, handsome fellow. Now, Andrew and I offline talk about just about everything. And recently I had texted Andrew about the Piers Morgan interview of Kyle Rittenhouse. And I said some colorful words about how I thought Piers Morgan was treating him in the questioning. And to my surprise, Andrew was saying, well, I kind of agree with him. And I like to discuss topics where I don't agree all the time. I like to have some disagreement, some debate, different things. I feel like we both learn from it. And in the case of this, I've not exactly butted heads with you, Andrew, before, but we have had lively discussions when it comes to things about guns. And I think a lot of this is cultural between UK and US. And my opinion is that your views, while you're not super comfortable with guns, may be reflecting in your interpretation of the tone being okay. Whereas I think that Piers Morgan was a prick, whatever the subject might be, in his delivery. So to take it from there, I'm just going to play a little bit of it. Then that way we can get a flavor and then we can just start to discuss it. It's easier, I think.
My next guest is one of the most controversial figures in recent American history. Kyle Rittenhouse pleaded self-defense when he was charged with murdering 2 people during the Wisconsin Black Lives Matter riots of 2020. And the jury agreed. For some, Rittenhouse has become a heroic standard-bearer for the Second Amendment and Americans' rights to bear arms. For others, he got off because of privilege. Now, 2 years after his trial ended, he's written a book called Acquitted to tell his side of the story. And he joins me now live from Florida. Kyle Rittenhouse, thank you very much indeed for joining me. First of all, let me just ask you, if you had your time again, would you, age 17, have put an AR-15 semi-automatic rifle around your neck and gone purposefully down to where these protests were happening, knowing what was going to transpire?
Well, Piers, thank you for having me on. With hindsight being 2020 as it always is, no, I wouldn't have gone, but that doesn't change the fact that I was attacked and I defended myself. I was there to help people and provide first aid, and that's what I did. I'm on video that night providing first aid and helping people, and then being ambushed and cornered and forced to use my rifle to defend myself.
Okay, so far in this, I'll say I don't really have an issue with it. I think it could have been different slightly, but it's not a bad thing. It's pretty factual, straightforward. He did have an AR-15. He was carrying the rifle, and he went to that location, or was at that location. So I think that's pretty factual. Don't really have any issues. Do you have any comments or thoughts?
No, not really. As you were saying at the beginning, it's that last, well, you were saying off screen, I think that it's the last 5% we sometimes disagree on. We agree on most things. And so, and the cultural aspect you brought up is really interesting as well, because of course there are different cultures that we're used to. And that brings up a whole other kettle of fish about philosophy and if there's any, what is true virtue and what is true morality and all these, is there a right or wrong around gun control and the being allowed to bear arms and those kinds of things. And I'm not sure there really is. You could have 1 million societies and maybe 500,000 of them would say, oh, you have a right to bear arms, and 500,000 would say it's immoral and whatever. And I grew up in one of them where nobody I knew had one. So it is something that over the years of getting to know more Americans and also understanding more about different cultures from my own, I have become a lot easier on that and a lot more understanding of it. Particularly being Jewish and having family in Israel and thinking about what happened on October the 7th. Those kinds of things do happen. And I do start to worry about what could happen. Without getting too, there are things I might hold back on saying exactly for fear of appearing too controversial. But we do live in an area where me and my fiance live. And if it were to become known that we were Jewish and this is where we lived and those kinds of things, we'd be in a lot of trouble, potentially. If something were to happen one day, a planned group attack by a particular group of people. So I am more open to the gun thing than you might expect. So that's where I'd start with. I don't know how it comes to be, however, that a 17-year-old is able to have, what is it, an automatic or semi-automatic weapon? This is like a machine gun, right?
No. And that's something that we need to clear up right away, because
what's it called?
It's an AR-15, which is similar to an M16. They look alike.
I don't know what an M16 is.
An M16 is what a soldier uses. And an M16 has the capability of a semi-automatic or a burst mode, or it can go into fully automatic. Fully automatic is one of the worst things you can use. It's very wasteful. It's hard to control. And you run out of ammo before you have anything. That's why they have a burst mode, which is pop, 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 pop. It's like 3, rapid fires. So that is it. Now, the AR-15 looks like it, but it is not it. And to give a point to it, almost all pistols that you see that are not revolvers, those are all semi-automatic. Now, semi-automatic means you pull the trigger and it fires. You pull it again and it fires.
Okay.
Same thing with a pistol. You pull the trigger and it fires. You pull the trigger and it fires. So both are semi-automatic. There's multiple rifles that are semi-automatic as well. And the problem I think people have is because it looks like the militarized weapon, people like to call it an assault weapon. It's not an assault rifle per se, unless you want to say anybody who's using a rifle on somebody else is technically assaulting and trying to kill them. So in that case, then every pistol's an assault pistol. Every rifle's an assault rifle. So
I see what you're saying.
I see what
you're saying. Well, you're going to have to educate me a fair bit in this conversation about guns and things. And I hold my hands up. All I can really do is offer my own opinions philosophically. But in terms of guns, you're going to have to be telling me. I'm relying on your knowledge today. So fair play. Again, I don't know why a 17-year-old has a gun at all when a 17-year-old can't drink. Not that I would rather he be drunk when he's got the weapon. I'm just saying that to me. But that's what I grew up in. I would have it the other way around. That a 17-year-old could have a beer, but not a gun. But
and I'd let him have both. But then to give you an idea, I don't remember how old I was when I first fired a gun. And I was very young, maybe 6 years old to 10 years old, somewhere in that range. And I fired all kinds of guns, shotguns, rifles. I wanted to fire my dad's shotgun. It was a 12-gauge shotgun. I had a 410 shotgun, so, much smaller one used for birding. And my dad's like, God, you really want to do this? Oh, yeah, whatever. So he put me carefully aside and, lined it up, and he let me fire, and I was knocked completely on my butt. I never wanted to touch that thing without supervision ever. So this is some different philosophical differences, but I grew up firing 22s, firing different rifles, and I grew up in the desert. That's how we ate sometimes, dude. Honestly,
you know what though? That's interesting because that's a different philosophy as well, though. I was just reading something brilliant by Helen Pluckrose, the sort of philosopher, friend of Peter Boghossian and James Lindsay. She's, in my opinion, just fantastic. She was talking about something different, but about the difference between politeness in America and the UK. And the UK has something to do with negative space because, and the most similar is Japan in other way that we're polite. Because we both are from these islands that are pretty much overpopulated, we've developed a form of social cohesion and social norms that mean that a polite thing to do is to not make eye contact, to look away, to give people their space. That's the politest thing you can do. Whereas America, this huge country, which of course has a lot of people in it, but that's more recently, and there's so much big space as well. It's more about showing other people they're not alone and going over like, hey man, how you doing? And getting in their space. So Americans find Brits rude when they come to America because, oh God, he wouldn't even look at me. And we find Americans rude because it's a very positive pro, and we're like, oh, whoa, okay, give me my space. And it's so much about the spaces we grew up in. So what you're saying now about growing up in the desert, it might be in a more appropriate place for a society to be more pro having guns. You might be further from law enforcement. You might have to take the law into your own hands a little bit more. Whereas if you grow up in like London, I mean, you've alluded to this at the beginning as well. You were alluding to the fact that, city person, you grow up, there's all these people. If everyone there has a gun, more prone for accidents to happen.
True. And by the way, it's not only protecting ourselves from people. Okay. I grew up with goats.
Yeah.
Those goats would be attacked by coyotes.
Yeah. Well, that's it. That was not something
thing.
I didn't have to think about coyotes and goats. I was just in London. Just wasn't, a thing.
But there's coyotes, I'm sure, in England. You just don't see them, but I think coyotes are almost universally spread. They're amazingly adaptive. But one point about it, it depends on America where you are, because we have different areas. It's such a big country. Some people are seen as rude. Have you ever heard the term masshole?
I haven't heard that, but I would just say we don't have coyotes in Britain.
Oh, you don't? Okay.
I'm not entirely sure what they are.
Ireland. Very interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
Maybe you don't. I sit corrected. But another factor, too, is ironically, while we may be more personable, we do believe in proxemics in America. And you will find that Americans will sit as far away from each other and then have to fill in the spaces.
Okay, so that still does happen.
It's a weird thing, but I think it's because we're used to space. So we give each other actual physical space. So we might look at you eye to eye, but from a distance.
Yeah, I still notice though when I'm in America, there's a lot more sort of pro politeness. There's a lot more. How's your day, sir? How are you doing? That's how you guys sound to me. I am so sorry for my offensively bad accent. It's just how it sounds. But in England, in England, it does tend to be a little bit more like, oh, yes, okay, hello, don't look at me, kind of thing. But once you get used to both, you're fine with both. I love being in America, and I understand, that people are being polite, and I actually am quite extroverted in that particular sense, so I quite enjoy that.
Yeah, awesome. And you brought up a point earlier. I don't want to let it go because I'm so glad you mentioned October 7th. In my personal opinion, if all those people were armed, not saying that they would have stopped it cold, but I feel like they would have slowed it down.
I'm surprised they weren't. Do we know they weren't in like the kibbutzes? They should.
From what I understand, they changed the gun control laws in Israel immediately after. But they didn't have them on hand. And I really do feel, again, I'm not saying that every homeowner that has a weapon is a crack shot. But if you are going to attack people in their homes and you know that the people are armed and they are in some degree of protection, you're going to pause a little. You're not going to go in quite as quickly. And when you think about everything that happened, with the people involved, no politics, just a straight strategy consideration. Yeah. Slowing down what happened would have saved lives, in my opinion. And I don't think it's easy to argue
I don't think that's even debatable. I agree. And like I say, I'm surprised they weren't. Whenever I've been to Israel, a lot of people do have guns. Again, for an English person, I think as an American, you wouldn't notice much difference. But for me, it's always like, bloody hell, whenever we walk into America as well, all the security guards with guns and police officers with guns, we're not used to that. But in Israel, I would feel safer with those people around.
Yeah, well, and part of it too is when you see military with guns and police with guns, you at least have an opinion that they're trained. Where you probably felt a little creeped out in America is when you saw people with open carry, and you're going, "Wait a minute, that's just a normal dude. What's going on with that?" But there's that old joke that guns make polite society. Yeah, there's some truth to that. When there is a cost. So, all right. So we're going to pivot back to the interview. So far, he hasn't said anything too untoward. We're definitely going to get into the 17-year-old location, all the things that he's bringing up.
2 people, and you wounded a 3rd. How do you feel about that?
Well, Piers, they attacked me. They left me with no choice. I have nightmares every night of being attacked and being ambushed and them trying to steal my gun and pointing guns in my face. It's not an easy thing to do, but I did what I had to do to stay alive, and if I didn't, I would be dead.
Yeah, listen, you were acquitted, and many in America believe that you had the absolute right to defend yourself. I'm just curious on a human level. You're very young even now. What are you, 20 years old now?
Yes, sir.
And you've killed 2 human beings and wounded a third. I just wonder how that feels.
This is where it starts to get a little out of hand. He did answer it, that he has the nightmares every day, he fears being attacked, etc. But it doesn't seem like it's quite enough for Piers. Now, you're a journalist, you have the degree. I only took, journalism in high school and learned how to scam people and how to manipulate when I write. But why is that a good tactic? Are we not starting to double down, like we're trying to get a particular conclusion here, or am I reading too much into it?
Well, yeah. Well, firstly, I'd say that my degree was in English literature, and then I did a journalism certification in the UK. But I wouldn't say that is like a marker of empathy or like having compassion. I mean, so many journalists I know who are official journalists are just total psychopaths. So that's the thing. And you know what? Maybe they're better journalists for it, because to an extent, yes, you need compassionate journalists, but you also need journalists who are going to be a bit ruder sometimes, a bit brusquer, and get to the truth. And it's something that I think I struggle with sometimes, but maybe then I offer a different kind of compassionate journalism. I think so do you. There are journalists who, if Ben Shapiro's asking someone a question, he asks them a question. Facts don't hurt your feelings. What's the answer to it? And Piers Morgan's very much the same. So I think the bit that you and I disagreed about mostly, and I think there are parts about the whole Kyle Rittenhouse thing that we disagree on, but I also admit to not being as knowledgeable about it as you are. But what we disagree on is Piers' tactics here. And I think, firstly, we've got to acknowledge that Piers is working on a much tighter schedule to what you and I are used to. We tend to do these hour-long or 2-hour-long videos where you can very gradually massage somebody into a place where we can ask them a difficult question. With Kyle, how long did he have with him? 10 minutes, 15 minutes? So he does have to get those questions in there. If I'm looking at a 20-year-old kid who I'm interviewing who has killed 2 people, and Piers did actually, I think, mitigate it by saying, plenty of people agree with you, you were acquitted. He made sure to say that and then said, what does it feel like? That's what I want to know as a viewer. What does it feel like as a 20-year-old? And as you say, he answered it. He said, I'm having nightmares. To me, look, that's interesting TV. It's interesting news. Sure. And it helps frame Kyle as a victim himself. So I don't see the issue with the questioning, but I think you didn't like it.
Well, we're not there yet. We're just barely getting in because he's already.
That was the bit you showed me.
Well, this preceding part I didn't show you. This is preceding. I showed you where he kind of does it again, and this is where I'm going with it. I got a longer clip.
I don't think that's an appropriate question to ask how it feels. It's not an easy thing to do. It's something I live with every single day. It's nightmares I have. It's something that I have to deal with. I have to deal with the PTSD and the trauma from having to do that.
Right. I mean, but it seems to me your emotions are more about you and your trauma because your life was being threatened and that side of it.
This is what I'm talking about. Now, remember, he asked him, and he said, I have the nightmares. Now, that part I did not show you because I didn't know it existed. I deliberately pulled a longer segment to get the full scope of it. So he asked, answered, and now Piers asked him again, but how does it feel? So then he answers again. Now his back's up a little bit. You could see he's defensive. And Kyle does look like he was defensive from the second he got in there. He kind of has a, deer in the headlights look. You would have to answer that for me, but I thought it might be because he's set up in a remote location. And from what I understand, when they go inside these trailers or whatever, you can't really see anything.
I've heard that as well. Yeah.
And you're kind of in, like there's this green screen. You can't see much. You're trying to listen to things coming through. So it might, to be fair to Kyle, it might be a kind of an uncomfortable thing. Like you and I are looking at each other and just talking, and that's a lot easier. So I don't know. Yeah. I could be wrong, but I do think they do remote setups that could have that effect.
He's a bit defensive as well, but I think the thing is he's made a conscious decision as an adult an adult old enough, he was old enough to hold a gun and go and I'm not attributing blame, but kill two people and injure someone. These are things that just happen. They're just facts. I'm not blaming. I'm not judging. They're just what happened. And he was 17. If he was old enough to do that, he was old enough 3 years later to decide to go on Piers Morgan, who's probably the world's most famous anti-gun person. So he must have known what he was walking into. And I think considering that, he doesn't really get that much of a hard time.
Okay, well, we'll keep going because I'm disagreeing right away because Piers is already turning it. So there was a question aspect, but the accusation is starting to come in here.
All right.
You didn't hear that when he said, it doesn't sound like you're really concerned. You're more concerned with yourself. And how, so let me back up a clip because I do think, and I could be projecting, I want to make sure.
I have to deal with the PTSD and the trauma from having to do that.
Right. I mean, but it seems to me your emotions are more about you and your trauma because your life was being threatened and that side of it, rather than the question I'm asking, which is simply on a human level, how do you feel about being so young and yet having on the record for the rest of your life now that you took the lives of two people, regardless of the circumstances?
And like
deliberately.
Sorry, I didn't mean to skip that. So I thought I had it on the screen, but I can pull that later. Again, though, he's digging into it. And that's where I'm saying he's kind of a prick here. He's like, oh, well, okay, you answered that. But it's really about you, isn't it? What about these? Okay, do you go to the soldier? There's soldiers who are 18, 19 years old, Piers. And do you say, how does it feel gunning down that Iraqi? How do you feel about that? Oh, well, no, because it's a circumstance. So he said, regardless of the circumstances, but it is absolutely about the circumstances in his mind, if we're looking at what he's saying, right?
It's a complicated one. I do see what you're saying. I wonder how you would feel if this were, because this is, of course, a divisive partisan issue, isn't it? And if this was somebody on the other team, let's say, if this was somebody from Antifa who had felt like they were defending their rights and so on, and then it ended up killing a couple of people, even though they were within their rights to do so because it was self-defense in those circumstances. And the question was asked, how did it feel to kill those people? And that person, because there is an unwritten rule, and it's a stupid one. I don't necessarily agree with the unwritten rule, but the unwritten rule goes that when you've inflicted damage on someone, you're supposed to say, oh, I feel so bad because even though I think one of them was a bit of a monster, maybe both of them were, I don't actually know. I've taken lives away that I shouldn't have, and that haunts me because I feel bad for the families or what. You're supposed to say that. Now, I actually prefer truth and honesty, and I think humans are a little bit less compassionate or overly compassionate than we pretend to be. It's one of the things that winds me up the most about humanity, this whole social media pretending that we're... So I actually respect that he didn't say that stuff, that we hear the boring stuff to hear, oh, I've taken a lot and I feel so bad about it, because he doesn't, and I want to hear the truth. And it's clear that the reason he doesn't...
I don't know that
he doesn't say that.
He doesn't have to say that. I mean, there's so much wound up into a violent situation. Have you ever been in a violent situation?
Not to that level, no.
No, well, hopefully most of us didn't, or we wouldn't have much population. He has PTSD of this. He has these all roll into one. There's nothing that's 100% like, oh, I'm just so glad I lived. No, I mean, they did die. And if you look at him in the police station, in the interview, he was falling apart. And I think that there's a matter of decompression that's going to have to happen. He legitimately has PTSD. And I would, recommend, looking that up, everything else. And I don't think my soldier analogy is completely terrible on that, because a lot of soldiers, they're doing their job. That doesn't mean they don't feel awful that person could have been a father.
Why is he going on Piers Morgan? Who's advising him to go on Piers Morgan then?
He's going on Piers Morgan to sell a book, to get his word out. And hold on. Okay, let me push you on that. When you say, why is he going on Piers Morgan? Well, if you are going to express a message and try to fight against a narrative going against you, you're going to have to go in the lion's den. I respect him for doing that. I don't respect Piers Morgan for being a dick. I guess that's the.
Well, don't you respect Piers Morgan for being a lion? He's gone in the lion's den. Do you want Piers to be a pussycat?
Well, I don't know. Do you want to say lion or lion? Let's spell it.
I think do we want the mollycoddling? Do we want a series of journalists to be afraid to ask serious questions to people that are important to Piers? And if somebody's coming on the show to sell a book, which you said that's the primary reason he's come on, I think there's nothing wrong with that. But you're going to have to answer some questions. And he doesn't answer to Piers. He doesn't say one thing about the victims. Let's be honest, he doesn't care about the victims, nor should he have to. And that's an important point. Why the hell should he have to? By all accounts, these two people he killed were absolute monsters. So say to Piers, well, you know what? And I respect as well that he can't then come out, because it's going to be very contentious to come out and say, I don't care because these two were lunatics and I don't care and I think I did a good thing. I understand he can't say that. But I also don't like the clamping down of free speech, the clamping down of journalists asking questions. This was not Piers. Yes, he has some judgment. Of course he does. But this was not Piers going, you did a bad thing. You took those lives. It's Piers saying, how did you feel? And the guy, it's interesting as a journalist to note that he does not show any sympathy for the people he killed or the families. You don't have to feel a moral judgment about that. But for the journalist to not pick up on that, I think would be neglecting his duties.
Okay, and by the way, I'm not trying to clamp down on Piers Morgan. I just said he's a dick. I mean, no, I believe in criticism. You know, it's the same way that
absolutely.
We recently had the events with the college presidents, and I think they all should be fired. Why should they be fired? Yeah. Not because they allow one thing to happen, but because they're inconsistent in the way they treat things.
Yeah,
that's the
bad
issue.
At their jobs. They're bad at their jobs.
Yeah.
And you think Piers is bad at his job, but I don't think it's inconsistent with his role as a journalist or the way that he treats other guests in general. He asks difficult questions to people. He's a bit of a shock jock. He doesn't shy away from them. And, you know, Rittenhouse would have known that going into it. I think these are reasons. I would have asked the same thing. I might have done it in maybe a calmer, softer way. And Kyle might have answered better. I think that's another point you've made to me privately. And that is a good point, which is that, you want to coax answers out of people. Sometimes that's the way. Whereas I think Piers is more interested in actually maybe getting clicks and...
Well, thank you. Yes. Of course he is.
But that's his job.
So that is one of those big questions. My show's a speck compared to yours or even Piers Morgan's. So I'm just saying. So there is a clickbait aspect of it. There is a success aspect of it. There is I can't stop watching aspect of it. I get all that. But I can still say he's a dick. So let's go a little further. And
yes, sir.
And you've killed two human beings and wounded a third. I just wonder how that feels.
I don't think that's an appropriate question to ask how it feels.
More about you and your trauma because your life was being threatened and that side of it, rather than the question I'm asking, which is simply on a human level, how do you feel about being so young and yet having on...
Can I point out too, and this is what I was attempting to say before, with the whole... Have you seen the whole sequence of how it went down in the film or the video?
No.
Okay, this is not a drawn out event. It's one of those. He's under attack. Oh my God, he's got the gun. Blah, 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 I'll pull. Some of what Piers Morgan is asking him to do, and maybe Kyle can get with therapists or whatever to get better. I don't think Kyle's even ready to see all of that. It takes so much time in a traumatic situation, and never mind it means 17. I'm talking about if I did it, I'm in my 50s, I would still have to take time to actually get to the point to even consider beyond that moment of, oh my God, I'm about to die.
Yeah.
Reactions.
Yeah. Were they coming at him with guns and stuff then?
They were not coming at him with guns. The gun in question was his gun, though. And the person who was grabbing it, once somebody grabs your gun, it's over for you, potentially. Yeah. And
what's the foreign part here for maybe a lot of British people, a lot of people from outside of America, where the gun, the foreign aspect to our minds, and that's not me criticizing or saying it's wrong. It's what's very difficult for us to understand. is why he went in the first place. It's inconceivable for us. What possible purpose? Defend your town, I guess. And I admit, you're going to have to educate me on this because I don't actually know enough. So what's the deal here?
Okay, this was during the time of the Kenosha riots. There was a police stop. I believe the guy's name was Jacob Blake, who was in a car with a potential kidnapping victim. There was an encounter with the police. Jacob Blake got shot, and I believe is a paraplegic now. So in a wheelchair. Now, he was shot in the middle of a crime, of a stop, not really a beacon of society. But we are in a state in the United States to where any kind of stop and question if there's a racial component, it makes headlines. And there were riots. These riots involve burning down businesses, destroying the downtown, looting. And Kyle Rittenhouse was asked, among others, hey, can you come defend the property? Because the riots were coming to town. The looters are coming to town. The people who are burning things down are coming to your business in that town. The police aren't doing anything. They're overwhelmed, kind of like some riots that are going on in England right now, go figure. And the businesses asked, hey, if you have any weapon, a gun, whatever, can you please come and just stand? And it's not for the idea of going to shoot people. It was literally the visibility. You said earlier how you felt comfortable or safer in some ways because of people being armed around you. This is the citizenry themselves doing it. Yeah. Kyle also had, I don't know if he was an official paramedic, but he had like paramedic training. So he had a first aid kit, and he was treating people who were injured in these mostly peaceful riots. And I'm being sarcastic when I say mostly peaceful, because I don't know if it's Kenosha, it was another one. There's a very famous meme of a news reporter saying, the mostly peaceful, and there's fire like completely behind them going up. That's what he was doing. So he was not there, as is represented by so many, to just sit there and be like, oh, I'm a badass or what have you. I mean, he's a kind of like a Boy Scout. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I get that, and he's not bad points, and I do understand it a bit better now. It doesn't sit well with me that at 17 he has a gun and has that responsibility. And look, I don't think it was a good decision in the end, because he went down there and he shot a couple of people. His life ended up in turmoil. And I think that's because 17-year-olds are not well placed. I mean, adults aren't either, but 17-year-olds in particular are not well placed to make these kinds of life-changing or life-ending, in this case, decisions. So I think for a lot of people, particularly outside America, it just looks, the aesthetics of this, the optics of this 17-year-old kid.
But are we missing half the story?
What do you mean?
Well, okay. You're saying, I don't think it was a great idea to have a 17-year-old kid go blah, blah, blah. Well, let me back up the time a little bit and say, well, I don't think it was a great idea to go burn freaking businesses down. I don't think it was a good idea to go have a riot. Well, thank you. But I'm saying it's like we're just erasing, and I'm going to reach back to October 7th for another parallel. How many people have just like completely forgot October 7th happened? It was like, oh, no, nothing was going on. Everybody's just whistling in the park, and all of a sudden, big bad Israel's going after people.
But is that how should law work that? But that's the sort of political opinion we're talking about, and I agree with you. But should law work in a manner whereby we do have a form of vigilantism? I'm not saying it should.
Vigilantism or guarding, though, because vigilante is revenge. Vigilante is you go and hunt people down who are against you, or you set something up. I guess you could say the Bernard Goetz subway thing. But if there is no initial crime, if there is no initial action, nothing happens here. And I do get tired.
Legally, not morally, legally, can you go and guard things with a gun, officers and things?
Sure.
I'm just asking.
Yeah.
You can do that.
Yeah, the right to
you wouldn't be
bear
able to in the UK. I'm not saying it's wrong or right.
Right.
This is so over my head. This is so complicated for me to really grasp.
Well, what if it was a baseball bat? Okay, let's just say, can you guard a business with a baseball bat in the UK?
You know what? I don't know legally what you can do. I really don't know.
Kind of scary
morally, yes. Morally, yes. I'm saying yes, of course. It's your business. Someone's trying to burn it down. You've got a baseball bat.
And then somebody goes to grab it from you and you get in a scuffle and then they get hit on the head and they fall down the stairs and they die. So let's just take the gun out of it and take the exact same thing, because a gun is nothing more than a tool in this case.
No, that's true. It's a tool that, is much more useful in killing people than a baseball bat. But I get what you're saying here.
It's also more effective in the fact that it could kill people too, for the visibility of, I don't want to mess with somebody with a gun. Most people, and it's very relevant too, because one of the people who attacked him, and I'm not going to go into his despicable charges against the guy, but he did just come out of being in a mental facility and was trying to do self-harm by others. And Kyle wasn't the first person that he had an encounter with. He was really going after people. So I would say that he himself, who started this whole sequence, there's actually somebody else who threw a brick at Kyle or hit him with something. He threw something at him. And that's kind of what started this whole jarring affair. This is not a well person. I'll just try to put it as best I can.
No, of course not. But that rally of people burning down businesses probably had a very high percentage of not very well people. Kyle sort of walked into the storm of that. But I get what you're saying. He wanted to defend the businesses and things. I think there is a fine line. If he was 25, I think I'd feel a bit differently about it. I think that is an issue at play, and it's why Piers talks about him being so young. I think there is something not being said by Piers there, which is like, what were your parents doing? Because if my 17-year-old kid, I don't have one, but if my 17-year-old kid's like, just getting the gun, going down to the old protest over there, I'm going like hell you are. It may be my 25-year-old kid or 35-year-old friends, like, hey, do your thing. So that's why I think it is a valid question. What does it feel? What does it feel like? You're a 17-year-old, and I do think that is something that we don't bear in mind enough with these young people. I often criticize Greta Thunberg. I think she's become a narcissist. And I think there was no way that wasn't going to happen, because when she was 15, she was at such a young age and she was told that she was better than everybody else and cleverer than everyone else and she had all the right answers and things like that. I think we do need to be very protective of our children. And I think 17 is obviously different to 15, but to go out and to end a couple of lives like that and then become the center of a political storm that was huge, I think it's a relevant question. You have actually explained a lot of what he's done in a way that I hadn't heard it before, and I appreciate that more. I still worry a little bit, but you have taught me around. I'm not saying you haven't. I'm also concerned because I know you want to have a fiery debate, and
no, I don't care about that. No.
I shouldn't just give in to you and say you've convinced me.
Discussion to
you
have.
Bastard.
There you go. I intend to be, but I do want to point out I was in the Army, right? And in basic training, where we were shooting rifles and all this, there were 17-year-olds. They got a waiver signed from their parents, and they were in the Army.
Yeah. Well, that's still not the same as going into
say 14. But I get what you're saying, but you start to get really into that line. That's why. Okay, so 18. So the second he turned 18, then we'd be good to go. You
say 14, Eric, but would you be happy then if you were at a rally for something you believed in, and a bunch of Antifa people turned up, and a bunch of their 14-year-olds were carrying, guns?
If they are guarding a property, that's their right.
At 14, you don't think something might go wrong? They might be a bit trigger happy at 14?
I would hope they've been taught. I grew up, again, I was using guns before I was 10. I've been in shooting contests. I won a archery contest when I was like 13, 14.
Yeah, but not everyone has, Eric.
I know, but I'm just saying my background, I'm very familiar with a lot of kids who use guns. It's just a thing. Now, I'm free. You know, I'll freely admit there are some kids out there. Well, I wouldn't want them to drive a car. Okay, dude. I literally am terrified of seeing them driving a car.
Well, 14-year-old, definitely.
Well, okay, but a 16-year-old. I know I'm soldier. I mean, I live in an area where I often joke that people get their driver's license in their car at the same time. And they're scary. They're horrible. Yeah. Do I go, let's take away their, well, I can't really do that, can I? So I don't want to draw the improper analogy, but it is a factor. And then there is, of course, consequences. Now, as far as political goes, I am one of the few people who will choke on my words and have to say that is their right. If it's their right, even though I can't stand them, I want to puke on them. I despise everything they're about. But if it is their business, you know, if you're at Acme Antifa or us, and you are protecting your property with rifles, again, you can stand there with a rifle all day. Nothing happens. When you go to burn down their business and they shoot at you, well, then guess what? You've got a problem. Yeah. You started it. You know,
I think, like, look,
responsibility.
Eric, everything you've said is pretty sensible to me, and I get what you're saying. These things are not as simple as black or white, and a lot, like I said at the beginning, I don't think this is always a case of there is one morally correct answer. I think there are opinions that can be made, and yours is very much young people like you, from a young age are responsible, and people should just be a bit stronger and harder. And to understand that and to teach their kids properly and all of those things. And I think that's absolutely fine. But I think using that exact same philosophy, you could say, but a kid who's even older than that, a few years older, who's trying to sell a book, has to understand that if he goes on something like Piers Morgan, the world's most famous anti-gun guy, that he is going to ask questions. And if you answer a question that is, how do you feel about killing those people, solely by talking about yourself? And that's, I know you said in other times he's looked sad, but we're talking about this exact interview only by saying, well, it's been bad for me. And that's an inappropriate question. You shouldn't ask that question. And these kinds of shutting Piers down in the same way that others might shut him down. I think that's, I think if you're going to stick with your philosophy, which I don't disagree with now that you've explained it to me, of being like, hey, we can do this. I think at the same time, you go into a journalist thing, they're going to ask you stuff. And when I get interviewed, I say, you ask me anything, and I'll answer it straight.
I do that too, by the way, and that's fine. But we're going to go one more thing that he did do, just so I can wrap it the full Pierce prickery.
The rest of your life now. You took the lives of two people, regardless of the circumstances.
And like I just said, it's something I deal with every day. I deal with the PTSD and the trauma and the nightmares. It's not easy to deal with it.
Your book, presumably you're going to make money from this book. Do you feel comfortable making money from this, which ultimately is a tragic story? I repeat, you were acquitted. There's no reason you can't do a book.
There, and I just wanted to finish on that last one, because the hypocrisy, in my opinion, of that is, you're going to make money off of a tragedy. Piers Morgan, you make money off of tragedies every damn day of the year. Your whole career is making money off a tragedy, in my opinion. And to ask him that question, this is a loaded damn question, because it is illegal for people, murderers here in the United States, to write books and then make money off their books, because a lot of people with option, it's like, ooh, I want to hear from, that serial killer and what did it feel like and all that. So they actually made it against the law to make money off of it.
O.J. Simpson did it, though.
O.J. Simpson said, if I did it. And it was
amazing loophole.
It was in cash. But anyway, I agree. But when you do that, you are painting a parallel again, because this is a person who has been acquitted in the eyes of the law and his jury of his peers. He is absolutely free. He was acquitted 100%. Even the bullshit charge that Piers Morgan didn't do enough homework about, wasn't even a legitimate charge. He absolutely had a right to have that weapon, and he never took it across state lines. So a lot of my issues with this is Piers Morgan, I feel like, is a pretty smart dude. Part of the reason why I say he's being a dick is because I think he is smart. And a lot of times he does have very interesting takes and does seem to go on the other side. This is a big blind spot. Everybody has blind spots. I get that. But when this case went out, you had Kyle Rittenhouse facing a litany. And let me share with you, this is from Matt Orfala, who does some fabulous work online, different video work and things like this.
That the Biden campaign used an image of her son who murdered 2 protesters.
He murdered people. The murderer, he shot at 3 people and murdered 2.
Kyle Rittenhouse, he murdered 2 people, by the way.
Murder protesters. He assumed that he gets to murder people. Blatant murder. Kyle Rittenhouse.
Yep.
Murdered these people. Murderers like Kyle Rittenhouse. Kyle Rittenhouse murdered them. They're like, oh, you went to go kill black people. And then at that Black Lives Matter protest, you murdered a couple of people. Bravo. Way to go, murderer. If he gets out of jail, maybe he can murder more people.
The Washington Post is having a sit down with Kyle because we want to know what a murderer is thinking. We shouldn't. I don't want to hear what he has to say, right? I don't want to hear what he has to say. He's a criminal, a cold-blooded murderer. If he would have been black, he would have been under the jail. He bought a weapon to murder people. And then people don't want to hear about Black Lives Matter. We don't.
You get the point, I think.
Yeah. Well, the Young Turks, I don't think, are known as the most neutral organization.
No, but it was a litany. And by the way, Anna Kasparian, over a year later, came forth with another video saying he didn't cross state lines. He didn't do this. We were wrong. It was wrong.
I don't really care if he crossed state lines. That's something that everybody got hung up on in America. And it was just like, these are like legal stipulations I don't really care about. I care about the philosophy, the morality of it, and the philosophy of it is, and you know what, like, Eric, you've made a lot of really good points, and you've made these before to me, and it has made me better understand a different culture from mine. But the truth of the truth of the truth is that nobody really knows what was going on in Rittenhouse's mind. Nobody really knows. And I think you make very compelling points. But the problem is that someone like Piers, unfortunately, doesn't have the same trust and confidence in Rittenhouse as somebody whose political opinions correspond with his.
Okay, but that guy, Matt Orfala, that I just showed you?
Yeah.
Totally not on that side. He took the time to watch the entire video, put it together. So he watched the biggest thing I think anybody can do, because it's all out there, and they showed it in the trial. So at the minimum, everybody, I highly encourage you to do it. I can't share it here because YouTube will take this stream down or this show down, but please go watch it. It's documented. It's fully documented. The entire incident, all of it is documented. Yeah. And watch it. And then if that's not enough for you, please then watch the entire trial, which I did do. And there's a lot of information in there, and then there's a lot of nuance. And I believe, and I think that's a good point to wrap up on. Don't you agree that we should always look for some of the nuance that's out there, no matter which side you may stand?
Yeah, no, I do. And I think I hope that I do that. And I hope that even though we've come at this from very different sides, we've found a lot of common ground here. You've definitely taught me towards certain aspects of it. But what's really nuanced, I mean, the thing that's easy to do is within your tribe to say and think the thing that's expected of you. Real nuance and empathy is being able to leave some room open for what the other side is saying. That's why I say, like, I think it's right. If that's what the crux of this debate is about, the crux of it is that Piers should or shouldn't be asking those questions. I think he absolutely has to. I think some of the ways that Kyle answered them, if that was the other tribe, if that was the left, if that was whatever, and they were saying, like, you shouldn't even ask me that, I've got PTSD, I've got these things, what would we be saying about them? That people are trying to obscure facts and impinge upon freedom of speech because of various victim signals and victim signaling. Not to suggest that he doesn't have those things, but I'm just saying we've got to be very.
How about if he just asked them? By the way, I know he's got a tight amount of time. I understand you have the nightmares. Do you think about those that had died and what might have happened?
I think that's not too dissimilar to what you said, is it?
I think it is, because he said, you seem only concerned about yourself. So
only after he'd asked him, a couple of times. Come on, in polite society, and I've said this, I don't actually blame him for this, but it was an unexpected answer, because people who talk publicly about having done these, they typically say, I think about the lives I've taken and their families and things like that. I cannot reiterate this enough, that I don't actually think that's an honest answer that people give, but he gave a truthful answer, and that was quite shocking, because people don't usually give that answer. So fair play to him for that, to Kyle Rittenhouse.
Because he's young and doesn't know any better.
Maybe. And then don't give him a gun when he's 3 years younger then. But because he doesn't know any better. But Piers then has to ask that question. I think as a journalist, and I'm not defending everything Piers does. I think you and I both know he sometimes says mad. He just is a shock jock, isn't he? But in that situation, you're absolutely right. The kid didn't know what he was saying. He didn't come out with the PR boring answer. He came out with quite an exciting answer, an interesting one from a journalistic perspective. And it was then Piers Morgan's duty to say, interesting, you didn't actually say you worry for the lives you've taken. Now, that might be, for me and you, who now I know more about this and you know a lot more about this, that's actually quite understandable given who the people he killed were. But it's still incumbent upon Piers to ask that question and make that distinction.
And maybe do his homework. But you know what? It's not up to you and me, Andrew. It's up to the comments. And sure. I definitely want to hear what folks say about this and their opinions. And like I opened with, though, I like to disagree and still be friends and have a good time. And I really appreciate your input. I think this has been a fun, productive show. Probably not contentious enough for some, but...
Yeah, I felt the pressure. I want to shout at you.
All right, everybody, definitely check out Andrew. I'm going to push his new channel, Heretics, which I think is actually probably even more in line with what we are doing here, because these are thoughts that we don't necessarily have, but we can't really discover what's going on in the world unless we start picking at the scabs and the sores and seeing what's going on the other side. So, Andrew, thank you so much, man.
Oh, thank you. I just say as well that Eric was the one who he sort of pushed me to start a new channel. So it's sort of now his responsibility. So you guys better come over to Heretics. Then there's like Peter Boghossian, Richard Dawkins, a lot of the anti-woke stuff, the gender critical stuff, some of that stuff. I think that Eric and his subscribers really like. So I hope to see you guys over there.